So the Titans mini set has been announced. It is Fall of Uldurar, and Yogg-Saron is back and got some crazy cards. This one is going to change how Hearthstone works. It's very core, it seems. We've also got some Hunter cards and Warlock cards. Lots to talk about. This one actually surprised me. I didn't even know this was coming today, but I'm glad it's Yogg-Saron because I put him in my expansion artwork this time and he hadn't shown up yet. So let's kick it off here talking about Cho'Gall Twilight Chieftain, because this has a really big impact on what Hearthstone looks like, potentially for like the next year, basically. Cho'Gall is a 6-mana, 6/7 taunt lifesteal, start of game, 25% chance to corrupt the game with a random anomaly. And we saw the anomalies introduced into Battlegrounds. Now they're coming to Standard, and we've got an example of 3 of them here on screen, but apparently there are going to be 20. Those have not been revealed yet. Examples include both players start with Yogg-Saron Hope's End in their hand. I believe that's the initial Yogg. That one's never going to get played. We're not getting to 10 mana. Get real. No, actually the game's a little slower. It's Standard right now, at least. Fast Track, reduce the cost of all cards in both players' starting hands by 1. So some cost reduction, but thankfully not like all cards. And Gift of Gluttony, both players start with 2 more drawn cards. So I would say for these 3 anomalies, these are actually fairly limited in their impact. They're not like crazy chaotic snowballing effects. You know, Fast Track is just your hand, starting hand. It's not all cards are reduced by 1. There's nothing super RNG focused here, like, you know, every time you play a card, cast a random spell. Oh, it's Yogg-Saron, you know. So I think these anomalies, if this is the sort of mold they're staying in, and if this represents the level of RNG and chaos that we should expect, I would say these are probably going to be fairly well received by people. I am a little worried if the anomalies get crazy and people feel like they kind of ruin a given game by, you know, stealing it from RNG or something, that this could be frustrating for people. But I suspect if they're in this vein, anomalies are probably just going to be rather skill testing, giving you some different curves, some different looks at a game, understanding how a matchup might unfold differently. Good players will probably be able to take advantage of anomalies better than bad players. More adaptive players will find opportunities in these effects that bad players won't. So could actually be a bit of a skill rewarding card. Now, it's also worth noting that anomalies are going to be in every single game for a while. For the first week after this launches in patch 27.4, they will be in all games. After that 1 week period, anomalies will be active in 25% of games until the next expansion, which would be like November, December, something. So we've got anomalies happening no matter what, whether you're running Cho'Gall or not. And if you are running Cho'Gall, you can actually get 2 anomalies at once. So like the base one's in the game now, and then a Cho'Gall can add an additional one. After the next expansion, there's no base chance for anomalies, so you would have Cho'Gall in your deck for that 25% if you want to try to force anomalies into a fourth of games. And then if both people have Cho'Gall, it's actually not a 50% chance for an anomaly, it's actually a 100% chance. They confirmed that on Reddit. It kind of goes against the card text here, but even after the expansion, if both people are running Cho'Gall, 100% chance for anomalies. So you can kind of, you know, have fun together. You both want anomalies. So here's the deal, right? Like, this is a really crazy mechanic, super fun idea. I love that this card exists. I'm going to be putting this basically in every deck, I think, forever. I think anomalies could be really fun for content. As far as how competitive this card is, I think that's a little bit of a harder read. You know, I mentioned that, you know, good players will be able to take advantage of this better than worse players, but you play people of roughly the same skill in Hearthstone, right? Because of MMR-based matchmaking. So, you know, even at like top legend, like, yeah, those are the best players in the world, but they're playing against other players who are the best players in the world. So will they be able to extract an advantage out of Cho'Gall? It may be true that certain decks can benefit from it a little bit more, just depending on like the average result of the anomalies. You know, maybe like, for instance, control decks just have like more time to extract value, or more time to get to Yogg's Hope End, or more health to work with, so don't have to fear as much, you know, disruption, or maybe a few of them are defensive in nature, so aggro decks lose out. Not to mention, of course, Cho'Gall himself as a base 6/7 taunt lifesteal. I mean, that's not great. I don't think decks are excited to play that, but that certainly aligns with a more defensive and slower deck if you're looking to actually get this card down and hope he has some degree of impact on board, which, you know, again, he doesn't feel terrible to play, I would say, as a lifesteal card here. So ultimately, maybe this is a card that pops into control decks here and there. Number one, for fun. A lot of cards like this get played just because they're fun and you're not sacrificing too much. So could have a meta impact in that regard. I don't think this is, an awesome 5-star, everybody has to run this card kind of thing. Because, it should be roughly symmetrical in its impact. Then you're running a fairly weak unit. But I think we'll still see this card a lot. Will show up a ton because people want to play Cho'Gall. And very occasionally, excellent players like myself will be able to reap the rewards of playing anomalies. Speaking of which, I've been asking for an effect like this in Hearthstone forever, and we finally get it. So I hope I didn't doom the game. Maybe it's my fault. Blame me. So next up, they also teased the Chaotic Tendril here. This one's going to be hard for me to review today because we haven't seen the support cards for this, but this is a new 1-mana 1/1 Battlecry. Cast a random 1-cost spell. Improve your future Chaotic Tendrils. And we're sad, there are ways to generate more Chaotic Tendrils for more chaos. And then they cast bigger and bigger spells, right? So cast a random 4-cost, 5-cost, 6-cost spell, etc. as you make your tendrils bigger. I think that's still, honestly, even if we get a bunch of support cards, this seems more meme than dream. I don't think this is actually going to be very useful because when we talk about random spells being good, that's usually because of the breadth of the spells. If you cast 4 or 5 spells, you are likely to get an impact that you want, to draw a card, build a board, find a board clear, right? Like your odds of finding the specific vector that you need increase with the number of spells. If you desperately need a board clear, casting 10 spells, you're way more likely to find one than casting a random one of a fixed cost. So you can't really determine the direction of the result when it's only one spell, especially, at fixed cost, it can be hard to kind of find that and map it out. So I think the impact for these is going to be far too inconsistent. I guess if you technically had 5 or 6 of these or something, you're kind of doing that in essence, but then it takes 5 or 6 Chaotic Tendrils and they're each going to have varying costs. And it's like, I don't know, man. So I'm still going to hold off on giving this an official score till we see more Chaotic Tendril support, but I have a feeling a card like this is going to be far too clunky. Again, I'll play the crap out of this. This looks super fun. I love building a deck around this sort of stuff, but I can't see this making a big competitive impact. Speaking of cards that will make a big competitive impact, this is Celestial Shot, a new arcade spell for Hunter, and it's 3 mana, and I think it's insane. It deals 3 damage at a base that can go face, mind you, and your next spell has spell damage +2, which obviously supports both the arcane package really well, but technically that's just generic spell damage as well, so could just impact any future spell that wants to go face or otherwise. So you get some really nice face damage, like chaining a couple of these together is just a pile of damage. Kind of reminds me of Aimed Shot of old. That was sort of like a 5 damage, spell, kill command technically too, but that requires some beast support. But this doesn't use your hero power, it just uses that next spell potentially to get that extra face damage. And then of course we've also still just got all the awesome arcane spell synergy cards that benefit from this super well. For instance, Eversong Portal is a natural fit on turn 4. Use this maybe to clean up a 3-drop, play an Eversong Portal with spell damage +2 on turn 4. You've got a giant board of 4/4s. That's awesome. If you don't get this on curve, save it for later in the game, ship it face and kill the opponent because you are a hunter with tons of aggression. So this card just looks really strong, supporting what Hunter already does well, with Arcane Hunter being one of the better decks in Hearthstone. Maybe that's why we saw some additional nerfs that surprised us for Hunter, because we're scared of this card coming along and just making it even better. But right now I just looked. Arcane Hunter is at the top of tier 1, at least at low ranks. In tier 1 at higher ranks, not top legend, but diamond to legend, and this card supports it super well. So this looks really strong. Next up here is the Twisted Frostwing, a new 4-mana 3/3 beast with Rush and Death Rattle. Summon a Chimera with stats equal to this minion's attack. So if you're able to successfully buff this thing's attack, make it a 5/3 for instance, it's going to be a Death Rattle. Summon a 5/5 because both stats are going to be equal to its attack. It doesn't say, stats equal to this minion's stats. The attack is spreading across both. And we're actually going to see a card here as well, Bestial Madness, that gives +1 attack to all minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. So, you could kind of already make this a 4/4 on its Death Rattle. And that makes this, an interesting little board swing sort of card. There are certainly other cards and other ways to make this big that don't maybe feel as awkward as something like Bestial Madness. I think first up is just always a bigger Jormungandr. This is just a really natural kind of buff you often want to play on stuff anyway. This helps you get a little bonus damage. You get some 5/5s, boom. So I'm actually almost intrigued by more like one-off buffs, singular buffs on this card, more so than this kind of bigger setup on Bestial Madness, because those feel, I think, maybe a little bit more universally useful. You know, they have a wider sort of utility. So between that and bananas, like we've got tons of bananas. Remember, a bunch of bananas still in the game. So like this plus bananas could be crazy. Now that's not a turn 4 play as much, right? This is kind of saying, hey, we want you to preemptively set this up bigger, but I think that's a Marvel Snap card. I think personally, like the post buffs are actually better in a lot of ways because you don't sacrifice tempo along the way. Now that said, again, I don't think this actually lines up super well in what Hunter's trying to do today. You know, it doesn't fit Arcane Hunter necessarily very well. The Big Beast Hunter stuff probably doesn't need this either, but I would keep an eye on this card. I'd keep this one in your back pocket because ultimately this could be a really big pile of stats, and you know, buffing a rush card usually doesn't feel bad either. So you see some potential in this one. So finally here we have Bestial Madness, a 2-mana shadow spell. I don't know if that shadow aspect matters at all, but that's something to keep in mind too for the future. Maybe they're gonna do something cool with shadow spells in Hunter. But this gives +1 attack to all minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. So keep in mind this is minions that are actively existing right now. It's not any future minions. So for instance, if you want to use this with Awakening Trimmers, which seems reasonable, then you'd have to play Awakening Trimmers first, make sure those worms are in hand, and then, you know, kind of give up 2 mana of tempo, potentially to make slightly bigger things later. And that slightly is what makes me nervous for this card. Although this affects a lot of things, the fact that it doesn't affect them by very much makes me nervous. How well is Hunter going to be able to leverage super wide boards that like kind of stick and connect on all of these little extra tidbits of damage while also sacrificing some tempo, because you got to give up 2 mana to get this going? I don't know, something about that feels clunky to me for Hunter. I feel like they just want to get going, and it's enough anyway, and they have plenty of ways to find damage. So yeah, you could technically use this as, you know, a board buff that helps seal the deal and kill your opponent, a mini Bloodlust, if you will. I don't know, Hunter's already good at doing that, right? And like Hunter doesn't want to give up mana in order to set up for later too often. If they do, they want to do really big, crazy things. And this feels more subtle and incremental to me. So although we have some attack synergies in Hunter, you know, we have ways to make big wide minions in Hunter in hand and on board, I'm still a little nervous here about the Bestial Madness. I think damage is good, don't get me wrong. Hunter likes doing damage, just I'm not sure this is the right shape of damage for the class. All right, so moving on over to Warlock, we get to see one of the chaotic tendril support cards here, the Tentacle Tender, a 3-mana 2/5, which at the end of your turn will give you a chaotic tendril. So this is not going to be good enough to get the chaotic tendrils there. This is the kind of thing I was talking about. Like, I think this is just too much of a trickle of chaotic tendrils. They're not going to get enough fast enough. Yeah, you can have a couple of these in your deck, but that's still only a couple of chaotic tendrils. I'm sure there will be some neutral cards as well that give you chaotic tendrils, but this just isn't rapid enough, fast enough. You can't get these numbers getting big enough fast enough to really make an impact. So in other words, I think this card's going to feel pretty clunky on its own too if you're not playing it for max chaotic tendril value. A 2/5 is just not exciting enough in its own right. A little extra value, but the randomness here can hurt you just as much as it helps you, again, until I think you get that critical mass of tendrils that are just getting unavoidably awesome results in a given turn. So ultimately this looks rather weak to me. Just not going to happen quite fast enough here for the tendrils. All right, so moving on here, we've got Curse of Flesh, and I grabbed this one off Twitter, so apologies for the quality. Apparently it's rated T for teen. It's a 1-mana shadow spell. Enemy minions cost health instead of mana next turn, which we've actually seen this effect, if you remember, in Commander Ulthok, a card that has basically disappeared since its own mini set release in Sunken City. Now that was all cards instead of minions, but it was also attached to a 5-mana body, which maybe that was part of the problem. It was expensive to play. This one might be a little bit more easily woven into turns, and you know, you could see this being somewhat disruptive or risk creating for the opponent at the very least. If you got something like a curse deck that's able to do a lot of damage and can like find lethals if you push your opponent to certain thresholds. A card like Curse of Flesh may say, okay, look, yeah, you want to play your Lady Sif, but you literally die if you do sometimes, if I've pushed you low enough. Or earlier in the game, it's like, okay, I know you have some key card you want to do, something that's going to help you stabilize, or you want to play your Titan or whatever, but that's going to put you down to 8. Can you survive 8 health sort of scenario, right? Where you might really be able to force your opponent's hands into doing something they don't want to do because they have to avoid that risk of damage output. So I think that's only going to be useful in decks that can create that kind of fear in the opponent because they have enough damage as it stands. Now that said, this is also pretty matchup kind of conditional. Like some matchups will just happily say, okay, I'm just going to play spells this turn, no big deal. I've got plenty of options. And I think that might ultimately be where this card falls short, is that it's going to be hard to make this one feel consistent. And then sometimes they're also going to be at 7 health when they need to play Lady Sif, and they can play Lady Sif safely and you just lose the game because it wasn't quite enough. So I don't know, I think Ulthok kind of proved that this didn't look as useful as we expected, and I don't think making it cheaper to do and more efficient, but also limiting the number of cards it impacts is going to change anything here for the Curse of Flesh. I kind of like these sorts of cards forcing this, real risk reward scenario, but it doesn't seem like it works very well. So then finally for Warlock here, we have Encroaching Insanity, a 3-mana shadow spell. Both players take fatigue damage twice, which the first time you cast this, of course, this is just a 3 damage spell. You deal 3 to both you and the opponent, 1 and 2. But keep in mind the second time you cast this, because you got 2 of these, that's actually a 3 and 4 damage spell. That's 7 damage you can deal to the opponent on the second one, which that's actually really efficient for a 3-mana spell. And unlike the Curse of Flesh we just looked at, this could be, a guaranteed just like, I'm going to kill you right now. Curse of Flesh kind of passes the ball to them and says, hey, okay, like figured out. This is just like, oh, hey, you're dead. I'm dealing 7. On top of that, of course, we also saw the fatigue package in Warlock recently. Don't forget that this still exists. We have Crescendo, which can just take fatigue damage, deal that much to all enemies. So you play this, you ramp up your opponent's fatigue. They take 7 on the second one of these. Crescendo deals 8 to the opponent and the board because you're also taking 8. Now, like at the same time, right, you risk dying because you're also taking this damage. So you have to have enough health to make all this work. But Warlock has ways to number one, to heal up, but also ways to potentially avoid that. We've got the Fell String Harp, for instance. Load this up, slam your insanities and stuff, make sure you have the right breakpoints for yourself, but then often maybe just kill the opponent. So I'm actually sort of intrigued by this as a lethal finisher, even if you don't necessarily run the entire fatigue package, which you could to again accelerate the fatigue a little bit. There is just a lot of potential damage output here as a finisher, and that makes this card kind of intriguing. We might also see a lot of ties with a card like this. We don't see a lot of ties in Hearthstone typically, but this could be a card that leads to a lot of ties, assuming it works and people do indeed die simultaneously, as I would expect. So I would definitely keep an eye on this one. This one looks kind of scary. It's expensive to get that first one going because that one doesn't feel as good, but then from there, your fatigue enablers and the damage output seems quite intimidating. Cho'Gall is a 3-star card. Celestial Shot is a 5-star card. Twisted Frostwing is a 4-star card. Bestial Madness is a 3-star card. Tentacled Tinder is a 2-star card. Curse of Flesh is a 2-star card. Encroaching Insanity is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Let me know what you think here of these Fall of Uldurar cards. Are you nervous about Cho'Gall? Or are you excited about Cho'Gall? I feel like my audience is going to be on the more excited side on average, but I have a feeling some people are still going to be really nervous about this card. I'm tentative as well, basically, depending on how the anomalies shake out. By the way, do these all have unique artwork? Because that's pretty insane if they made 20 cards with unique artwork. I mean, they're all obviously kind of reflective of one another, but that's a lot of really cool, distinct art. So anyway, share your thoughts on these cards. Stay tuned over the next 5 days. We've got a lot more reviews on the way, so it's going to be exciting times. Thank you, as always, for watching, and until next time, game on.